I'm Mary Olivanti Duerksen. I'm a poet and musician, as well as a retired pastor. These pieces are part of a series of, some of them come from a series I wrote for a book that is actually a sociological study of immigration, but the editor wanted to finish with something more reflective of the human experience and not just all the sociological kind of facts and figures and so on. So, and then the last piece is one that I originally published back when I was still a student, and they all kind of came together. During the winter, or during the fall when I was on the tour, I was telling Ed, our director, about this, and he said, well, I'm featuring Detroit composers. Why don't you do, you know? I said, well, they're all poetry. And he said, so write something. Knowing that I was one of my undergraduate majors was music, he said, write something and put it all together. And so that's the genesis of this piece. The last one was composed first, and it was written in 2018 during the Syrian refugee crisis.
Oh, yeah.
You guys remember all that time when Syrian refugees were trying to come over from Libya on these little stupid boats and get to Italy across the Mediterranean, and people were drowning and children were drowning, and I was angry, and so that last piece kind of came from that place. The first three pieces were composed as part of this sociological study that ended up being kind of a way of looking at the experience of migration and of immigrants. I kind of dug into the history. I looked at different ethnic groups and their experiences, that some of which had been, there are some interviews and such like that. And so one of them turned out to be an experience, a poem about an experience I had had in Dearborn, our Arab American kind of cultural center, right? And the other two were just kind of about the themes that I lifted up in the essay for this chapter about feeling at home and what that meant, and how when you're dislodged unwillingly, whether it's through being enslaved or whether it's through war or famine, that you dislodged from your home, your ancestral home, what actually does ever feel like home again. So that's the genesis of the other two. We haven't performed the whole thing where I've actually read the poems, but just hearing the choir rehearse the music has been quite a moving experience. Kind of part of me says, "You wrote that?" And part of me is like, "Gee, that the music does lift that text up and kind of, you know, it's supposed to be about what gives hope in the face of what people experience." And all of us, I believe that this is kind of a universal theme, really. Not all of us have been physical immigrants or refugees, but most of us have had experiences in our lives where that has been kind of where we are. That was an interesting process because I thought I was going to do the words first, and I ended up composing the music first, and that's kind of a toss-up with anybody that writes vocal music. That's, you never know which is going to come first, but just playing at the piano and getting a melody in my head, getting kind of a theme out of the rhythms, which felt like the rhythms of the poems a little bit to me, and then creating a harmonic bass, which is very kind of modern. And I chose that because I wanted the harmonic bass to be simple. I wanted the words, the text to stand out. I didn't want to cloud the text with a lot of extra notes or even harmonies. So the choir is singing in unison. They're singing in their own register, bass or soprano or whatever, and the accompaniment falls underneath that. When I hear them singing it, some of the words that I just kind of put in because they fit, now they start to stand out as having meaning and speak to me in a little different way than they may have initially. That's always, you know, prosody in music composition. It's how you fit words and text to music, right? The notes and the words fit together. And sometimes you have to move something around to make them fit. either you have to change the melody or you have to change the words. And so in some of those instances, some of those lines, I was struggling to make them all come out together. But then when I heard them sing it, I thought, oh, that actually sounds pretty good. I have had the privilege of over 40 years of kind of getting to walk with people through all different journeys in their lives. Many of them are tragic, sad journeys. I've also been able to get, the theology of my tradition, Lutheran, gives me ways of approaching things that are going on in the world with kind of a lens of looking through them from the perspective of what does the gospel say? What does the good news of our faith say to this situation? And I think that was part of what motivated me initially in the first poem, was just that in my mind, I'm like, this is right in the cradle of Christianity. This is happening. Syria, is one of the oldest communities of Christians in the world. Not the oldest, but one of the oldest. And so is Egypt. And those have sometimes been kind of lost, but that sense has been lost because of things that have happened in more recent history. But I'm like, how the earliest Christians view this. I hope they would sit with the words, sit with the circumstances, and do it in a personal way. Not just because migration and those kinds of issues are part of the public conversation, although it's a very important conversation for us to have as a nation, but to kind of draw into their own sense of how it impacts them. Where in your lives are you, where your ancestors were immigrants? What would it be like for you if this happened to you? How would these words maybe express what you experience, how you feel, what you might like to do? I would hope people would become more active on this issue, whether it's to connect with organizations that seek to support refugees, whether it's ways of reaching people in their own community or their own circle who may be feeling homeless or countryless in a way. To be a refugee is life-altering, and it flows through generations. So that whether you've experienced that really as being displaced from your home, or whether you've experienced emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, just be aware that it is a change that has to be reckoned with in people.